Okay, it's 1:30. Shall we begin? First things first, check your cell phones, silence them, please. Can we start with a roll call, please?
Commissioner Shoemaker.
Present.
Commissioner David.
Present.
Commissioner Gossett Simon.
Okay, it's 1:30. Shall we begin? First things first, check your cell phones, silence them, please. Start with a roll call. We have a little backdraft.
Commissioner Shoemaker.
Present.
Commissioner.
Okay. Thank goodness.
Sorry about that. Vice Mayor Moore.
Present.
Mayor Hillman.
Present.
Town Manager Labadie.
Present.
And Town Attorney Tercivia. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everybody comfortable with the agenda as it stands? Any additions or deletions required?
No, sir.
Need a motion to accept it then?
I move we accept the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, just say aye.
Aye.
Linelda, do we have any public comments?
There are no public comments today.
Okay, we will close public comments. Basically, the sole reason for this meeting is to begin the discussion process from the Charter Review Board. And to begin with, I'd like to thank the members of the Review Board for being present today. Very kind of you to put even more time in on this. We appreciate all the original time that you did put in. And we will spend our time reviewing it today. I see Ron Miami is on Zoom, so he's available there as well. So thank you, Ron, for zooming in. Okay. I don't know that there is any real sequence we should be going through on this, so I think we should just start. It begins on page 14. The one thing that I believe we should leave off of today's agenda is really the discussion on what are the spending limits should be set at for the commission. That in itself is going to be a very lengthy discussion. Okay. And I've also asked Marshall to dig back into the past to bring to us some additional information. Things like what were the budgets back then in those days? But even more important to the budget, what were the responsibilities of the commission and of the town during that time? The fact that the spending limit was set at 350, we're just all accepting that 350 was the number, but who knows whether that was the right number or the wrong number at the time. We need to look at what the responsibilities were back then. For example, did we have the water plant then? And if we did, what was the operation at the time? What was the budget of the plant at the time? Has the plant been expanded since then or not? Things like we now have hopefully we'll have a fire department to deal with. What was the size of the police station back then? So we need to look at what were the issues that were facing the commission and the manager at the time, and then try to relate that to what it is now, not just, okay, take this at the 350, put a CPI on it or whatever, extend that to today's situation. I think we have to look at more issues that affect it. So I think we need more data before we even enter into the discussion. I thank the review board for their input. We need to also put that into the mix. So there's a lot more for us to learn before we even start to discuss it. Okay? Yeah.
And I'd like to add, Mayor, that, as we look at the past, one of my first questions, once I learned from our town manager that to do a referendum, $60,000 at least. So then how many referendums have we done over the years and for what kinds of projects? Because it's those projects that drive more expense, and you don't want to have a referendum for, any project that comes along, given now the expense of 60,000 plus per referendum. I know there are some residents who feel, oh, well, let's just do a referendum anytime we need it. It's a lot more complex. There are a lot more requirements involved in doing a referendum, not the least of which is just organizing it, getting all of the officials lined up to support us and so forth. So anyways, it's just to add to your point, Mayor, that we definitely need a little more information. At least I'd like to have some.
Yeah, that's very true. Just to clarify it to anybody that's watching at this point, that 60,000 is for a unique referendum. If we were to call for a referendum just for us,
right,
to put a referendum question on an existing election that was coming up, runs about, what do we figure, 16, 18,000. Okay, which is still is not, it's not free. Okay.
Mayor,
Okay, yeah.
excuse me for being late. I was working on a town-related matter, so I apologize that I was late. And then secondly, I have a file from 018, which I can provide to Mr. Labadie to give to you and the commission, that when I talked to our then still with this Arlen Boris foreign mayor, who was in on this discussion in late 18. Feels like it today. And in the very early times of this discussion, but prior to 1990. So I have that file. I'll get to you and through Mr. Labadie.
Great, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So just in terms of rules of the road as to how we might want to go through this today, see if everybody's in agreement, including you three and Ron. I think we just take it from the top, kind of go through the way it's laid out here. I started to look at maybe there's a way to group these things, like stay with the commission suggestions first, then go to the town manager suggestions, but that's kind of the way it's laid out here anyways. So if everybody's in agreement, we'll just take it from the top and start talking it through. The first one was the terms of office, and the recommendation from the committee was to change it to three-year consecutive terms. Open for discussion here on our side. So maybe we kind of walk it through. Looks like you want to jump on it right now.
Yeah,
So go
I
ahead.
I think it's a good idea to have three-year terms, among other things. If the populace doesn't like a particular commissioner, they can always just not vote them back in.
Right,
So
right.
it's not locked down. My issue with the suggested changes is no person shall serve more than 12 consecutive years as town elected official, which I don't have a problem with that. However, if you can serve 3 terms as commissioner and then 3 terms as mayor or vice mayor, you really can't.
Well,
Be-
correct. That's the way it's worded.
The way it's worded, you have to have a year off, which means you never get to the 12 years.
I think that's correct the way it's worded. Do you have a problem with that?
No, I just want to make sure that we understand that, because I'm not sure then why we need to put 12 years in.
You want to give the clarification, somebody from the group?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the commission, thanks for having us here today. I'll give my recollection and input. Certainly the others can do so as well
Please.
if we're not quite in sync. First of all, I think to go to the intent, yes, we wanted a cooling off period. We did want a 1-year gap if you serve that consecutive period rather than jump to another. We thought it might be a good idea to have a cooling off period, just because there's there is some attraction to having fresh blood, having a little bit of a change, and seeing how that works out. So that really was the intent, just to kind of break it up a little bit, as I recall.
I have no problem with breaking it up and having a gap year, but that would then come after 9 years. It would come after three-year terms, which makes it 9,
Yes.
not 12.
Yeah, how do you get the 12?
Well, then you would, if that individual served 3 years in a different position, say
Right.
you served 3 years, 3 consecutive, and then you served 1 term for 3 years as vice mayor or as mayor, you would then have to take a year off.
Right.
Okay,
That's what I understand.
That's how it's
Okay.
laid out now.
That's how
all
I
right,
understand. Yeah.
that works out if you
Right.
switch
That's right.
from positions because they're separate
Right.
positions.
I think
Right.
Rick wants to add something.
Yeah, I think that Rick Greenwald,
Where
I
do you
think that
live,
you
Rick?
guys pretty much figured it out, but I think the goal of the group was to ensure adequate continuity without allowing perpetuity. So
Right.
that
That's a good one.
the way this would work is we have a mayor or a commissioner that's very popular in their spot. They can serve 9 years instead of the current 6. But this would also offer with the 12 years, if somebody was, again, just hypothetically vice mayor for 6 years, they could then run and be mayor for another 6 years without taking a break. So we couldn't come up with a perfect scenario, but this is what we thought would kind of meet most of our needs. We also had discussions about 3 years versus 4 years. We elected to stick with the current 3-year terms. And one of the reasons for that was that some of us felt pretty strongly that with a 5-member commission and 3-year terms, every 2 out of 3 years, you get to potentially replace 2 members of the commission, whereas it gets stretched out longer with 4-year terms.
Mhm.
So if something was unpopular and passed by a 3-2 vote, there'd be a decent chance that 2 commissioners would come up and the balance might shift in a shorter time period. So I think that roughly summarizes most of the thinking. We wanted to make it longer. We thought 6 years might be a little short, but we didn't want it to be forever. So this is what we came up with. Thank you.
Makes sense.
Mhm. I'm good with that.
John, anything to add, or you okay?
I guess I'm still trying to figure out the 12 years, why that is the number for us. If you do 3 years as commissioner, 3 years vice mayor, 3 years as a mayor, it's 9. Now, if I take a year off in between, that's 10. So right there,
No, that's
he's
not,
done.
no, you're missing it. The way this is laid out, could be laid out differently, is you could serve 3-year terms for 9 years
Right.
in any one position.
In
Then-
succession.
Yeah, and let's take the assumption take me. I could serve, if the population so wanted, I could serve 9 years as mayor, and then I could serve 3 years as either vice mayor or as commissioner. And then I have to take a year off before I can serve again in any position. Then the clock starts all over again.
I got it.
Now, they could have said 15 years, or they could have said 18 years, any multiple of 3.
Okay, I wasn't thinking 3 years in any one of those 3 positions.
Yeah.
More than that. So you really could spend all 9 years or 12 years in one position.
Yeah, it could be
Consecutively,
any
too.
combination, but 12 is the max.
And that's
what
assuming you
they're
would always
proposing.
get reelected and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
But it maxes at 12, and you got to take a year off. You okay?
Yes.
Peggy?
I'm fine with the numbers on that, if that works for everyone. It's
Okay.
just a little bit of math times 3s this way or that. I would like to add that it was interesting when, I know everybody hears about League of Cities, but they had done a study and they found that the persons very involved in commissions, councils throughout the state actually did serve the good people who were serving in the state did serve for multiple terms and had great success in those towns. So there's backing in the state that the term limit should be reevaluated at the local level, except for one mayor who served 62 years in Central Florida. Do you know he lost his last election and died 2 months later, just as a side note. He was a great guy. Thank you.
Very good. Natasha?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. And I guess the only point of clarification is that year that you're supposed to take off is for an elected position. So if someone still wanted to be involved, they could go out for a board or something like that.
For sure.
I just, I imagine that was by design, but I just want to point that out, that if someone still wanted to be a part of it, you could do financial advisory board or planning board or something like that. So
Good
I
point.
think that makes a lot of sense. If somebody who really wants to continue to be involved, you can be. And so I'm in agreement.
Just want to read the kind of the last end of the last sentence in this, or the last sentence. In the transition purpose, the mayor, vice mayor, and members of the commission in office as of the effective date of this amendment shall be subject to the 12-year restriction, and all time served during the successive terms within the current office shall count towards the 12 years. So what we're doing now counts towards the 12 years. Okay? We're all comfortable with that. Should be. I totally agree with it. Yeah, I have no questions. I'm comfortable with it. So we're accepting that. We're good to go.
Good to go.
Okay, done. Go on to the next. Commission eligibility. There was a suggestion to increase it from 1 year to 2 years. The commission or the committee didn't see that as a good thing to do, so they rejected it. Anybody here see it as a reason to increase it to 2 years?
No, I see no reason. And as a matter of fact, if somebody who really wants to get involved moves into town and is really good and gung ho, I'd say welcome them.
Okay, so we're all comfortable with accepting their recommendation.
He still has to, or she still has to be elected.
Oh,
So,
they still have to be elected.
And be here for 1 year. You
Yeah.
have to be a resident for 1
yeah,
year.
The suggestion to the committee was to change it from 1 year to 2 years.
Right.
The committee didn't see that as being necessary. Before we accept that as their recommendation, wanted to see if anybody here wanted to discuss it.
Mayor?
Once, twice, yeah.
I had suggested that only because there's been such an influx, 1,000 people per day are moving to Florida per day. And there had been a little bit of a talk and movement in other municipalities in the state of increasing the numbers of years for people to serve, because it's just an asset to have lived in a community in order to serve it. So I had put that on the suggestion list. I'm fine either way. I thought it should be looked at for discussion.
Okay. Anybody want to comment on why you didn't see it as necessary? No. Okay. I don't think it got any traction. Okay, move on. Vacancy in the commission. Suggestion was made that if there is a vacancy with only 3 months left to go before an election, and obviously somebody running for the commission, that vacancy not be filled. The committee, again, did not see that as a necessity, and so they're not recommending any change. Again, anybody here on the board?
Me,
Okay.
that was also mine. And the reason for that was in my first year, two persons on the commission had to be replaced. And it became a very hot topic at the time. We're talking end of 2018. And the reason was that the mayor had passed on Christmas Eve. And we actually had enough time to put his replacement onto the March election, which was already scheduled, wouldn't have been an additional schedule. 2 previous persons passed away in office. And one of them, in the last prior 5 years before that. And one of them could have in fact been put on the schedule for an election. And one of them was in February, which was too close to the March term. But we were given different guidance at the time by the attorney. Not Glenn, it was another one. And the difference was just 10 days. If one should be put on the ballot for March and one should, the difference was just 10 days in their passing in terms of the calendar. And I suggested it because at the time, I felt it reasonable, because it was such a brouhaha then, to possibly appoint a planning board or finance board member to that short 2 or 3 month period prior to an election to just fill the seat until we could have a proper election for the spot, if it's that close to the election in March, the second Tuesday of March. And I thought it deserved merit to being looked at because it was a big issue then. So
Well,
that's all. That's,
yeah.
again, it's a numbers thing. If there's time, if someone cannot serve out their term and by November or December, that's enough lead time to put that spot on the ballot, and then have someone very versed in town business, such as anyone on either of those two boards named, just thinking of two very active boards, could fill the seat. So it was just a thought we should look at. And
well,
it was a big issue in 18.
what I'm reading is the suggestion was not to fill the seat. And what you're saying now is fill it with somebody from the board.
Yes, sir. There were those two options, not to fill it, which Boca Raton did with success recently when Jeremy Rogers was called up to active duty in the military. And they left it open for, I believe, 6 or 7 months, and they were able to operate fine. So we have the two options of leaving it open for, say, 3 or 4 month period or 2 month. I think the access, if I could ask Clerk Gaskins, the time to provide a ballot measure is what, 2 months, 10 weeks?
The supervisor of elections requires all municipalities to provide ballot language 95 days prior to the election date.
95. So it'd have to be a short term prior to
I get
95.
it. The problem with
way is
leaving it
an option.
open is then you have 4 commissioners and you are subject to the possibility of a vote being 2-2. When that happens, you can't get any place. You can't get anything passed.
Understand.
And then you have a town that can't do anything. So
Understand.
that's problematic, and I would really be opposed to that. Now, I'm only one vote, obviously. Pulling somebody and offering the position to somebody that's on the boards, the 2 boards you recommended, well, finance and planning, that's a great idea. And of course, it'd be assigned for a limited time period. That idea I really endorse. I think that's a great idea. But unless it was written incorrectly to the committee, or if what I'm reading is only half of what was suggested, the committee had rejected the idea of leaving it open. If we want to talk about assigning it to somebody on the boards, I think that's a practical solution and one that we would consider if the time came up. I don't think it should be put in the charter,
Sure.
because you don't know who's on the boards at what time. You know?
Yes. I believe the language that I had suggested was properly forwarded to the board. And then at the time, I had not included the other option of someone from one of our active boards, our very active and
But
important.
It's a
boards.
great idea. And
Just
if
a-
it comes up during
just
our
came up.
tenure, we
Yes,
should
sir.
really consider that.
It's just the public gets very involved, and certainly it has worked out that we function fine with our different avenues of appointing a commissioner. It was fine, but I thought it merited a discussion, and then it popped into my brain, well, gee, we could put on one of the board
Gotcha.
fellows.
Okay.
Thank you. Or
Does anybody want to
So-
discuss leaving it open?
Well, I guess can you review what the process is right now? If we had to replace one, if we had one open position on the
Okay.
commission?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Marshall, but what the remaining 4 would do is we would select somebody that we think is qualified and meets the requirements of residency, and we would offer that to them.
So I
Is
like
that
the
not correct?
idea. Is that-
No, that is correct. I mean, if you look at some of the mechanics that Commissioner Augusta Simon was saying, some of the challenge we have now there's a greater lead time than an 18.
Mhm.
Now that the supervisor of election wants greater lead time, so you get 95 days. The staff part, the mechanics for staff issue that we faced is how do we ensure we get enough people qualified by that period of time to enter onto the ballot? So that also makes it challenging that say somebody passes, it was about 10 or 12 days, I think in 18 to do it. The trick that we had is it was during the holidays. How do we go find people, have them go set up the bank accounts, do that, say that they want to do it and then get themselves registered on the ballot. 12 days is very challenging, right? So that's kind of the mechanic. Now we're back 95 days. So you could be, if you gave a month lead time, you're looking at 125 days really to qualify for a pre-scheduled election and the challenge in 18 is that we were following into the 19 election cycle. So there was no federal election in November. So that allowed for a longer period of time because you're obligated, I would say by charter is that you would till the next regularly scheduled election. So in a even year, you got 2 elections, March and November. So no one really sits longer than in an appointed status more than 6 months. On those odd years, based on the timing, that was
It's over a year.
it was like right at that deadline, it created that longer lead time. So it was actually over a year. So that's we just got to figure out those parts of it. So it can be challenging.
Regardless, we're just talking about the amount of time the person would serve.
Right.
Whether there's enough time for somebody to run or not, but we still would have to find somebody and offer them the position, either for the balance of the term or for the whole term.
And so where I was coming from really is to confirm that, but also not be limited to picking candidates from 1, 2, or however many boards, because you could also pick someone who's already served on a commission.
No, she's just making a suggestion that we look at the boards
As a
because they know what's going on in the town. I mean, it's almost a prerequisite that you wouldn't want somebody to come in to fill a position here that doesn't know what's going on in the town.
And so the commission would review the candidates, their
Sure.
credentials, and then
And-
make a decision.
And we would vote.
Right. And there I was thinking, first thing I would do today would be, hey, Greg, Bobby, are you available kind of thing?
He would,
as
he
an
would be,
example.
he would be a candidate.
And that's perfect. That's fine. I don't see a need to change as long as we have that as a process.
Yep.
And that's existing.
Okay, right.
And I just have a
I-
question. Oh, sorry. I just have a question about the current process. Is there like a notification, like you have to put it in the newspaper or you have to,
Generally, we notify. So Linelda is required by law that when a qualification period opens, you have to advertise it. In a unique sense, like if someone is to pass or resign unexpectedly, I think you can still qualify people without full advertisement cycle because of the situation. So if we didn't have the 30 to 45 days lead time to advertise as normal,
Mhm.
and then say we had, the commission felt comfortable that in 2 or 3 weeks, you wanted to try to qualify a couple of folks, you could do that and get them on the ballot. You don't have to have that lead advertising period too. So
so you don't need that lead advertising period for an appointment?
for an
It's not
appointment, no,
required,
appointment,
no.
you can just
You can appoint.
do it. Again, I think Commissioner Gaston did a good job kind of pointing out some of the downfalls of it and concerns and some of the pushback from the community of why didn't we get an election? So I think that's kind of where you have to find that balance, what's comfortable at the time.
Mayor, I did look up the dates of the past commissioners who sadly left us during their terms. And one was Christmas Eve, December 24th for the late Mayor Feldman, and the other one was December 15th of 2014 for the late Dennis Sheridan. And so it was those timeframes which were so close, like, why can't we just do a temporary fill until the second Tuesday in March? And
Yeah.
that's where it's just a matter of numbers once again,
Right.
that we try to get it right. Whereas if it's a 2.5 year lead time, then that's a long, that's different, or 11 months. So just wanted to raise the issue in terms of the numbers. And I did run it by the planning board chair, David Axelrod, at one time in the last couple of years, and he thought it was a fine idea if we elected to go that route, just
Okay,
as an idea.
yep,
Thank you.
thank you. You had something?
Yeah, I really don't want to leave a seat open because that's just rife with problems. Certainly not on a 5-person commission. If you had 7 people, you're running into a different situation, but with 5, I wouldn't. As far as appointing from one of the sitting boards, pick someone who's involved, I think that should just be a matter of policy, not in the charter. I wouldn't put that in as a requirement. I think it's a good idea to look at them, but remember, if you appoint them, then they have to resign from the committee they're on. So that creates problems there as well.
Yeah, they recommended no change.
Yeah, so yeah, I wouldn't change it at this point. We just could recommend to future boards that when if they have to look for a replacement, they might start looking in these places.
Right. Okay, we're good.
Yes, I'm fine with that. And I think it merited a discussion so that we can say we did review and look at the options in case in the rare event that anything like this happens. And I'm fine with just keeping it out of the charter and considering it as a possible policy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, the next one is rules and procedures. This is basically requiring changing the term should to shall hold a meeting once per month, regular meeting once per month. The current wording is should hold. They're recommending changing it to shall hold. I get no problem with that. Anybody have a problem with that?
Yeah, I know that there are towns that eliminate, say, the month of July.
Yeah, well, take the summer off. Some even do.
Right, some of it was just take off one. I don't know that this commission has ever actually done that.
Well,
But
this,
I think I would like to leave the option open. I mean, maybe in December, you want to just take off the month of December if there's nothing that is coming up. We,
okay,
in fact, we usually have more than 2, or very often have more than 2, never mind just more than 1. But I think I would like to leave the should just in case that should come up.
John?
Honestly, if a responsible commission is going to hold meetings as needed, and typically we've been doing 3, 4 meetings, 5 meetings, plus now an election and so forth. So I'm in favor of flexibility. I would support Commissioner David's suggestion that, unless we're being irrational, we're going to need these meetings anyway. I don't think we need it in writing, so I'd stick with the should. Shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Okay, Peg?
Yes, sir. I'm fine with should also. I think we have meetings as we need to, and we all make adjustments to our schedule to be here as we need to.
Okay, that's 3 for should. I don't know unless you've got a compelling reason.
Well, I guess I would like to hear what was the rationale that
Yep.
the
Yeah, I'm
charter
gonna give you a
board
second.
discussed. And I guess my second thing is in such building, now with Zoom, I just wonder, I guess I get concerned, let's say in a catastrophe in the building, we can't meet in such building. I guess I wonder if the board discussed the Zoom, the possibility of meeting via, technology, not in such building, but, somewhere else. So those 2 things.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a big snowstorm or something. We couldn't get in here.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've been digging into the whole disaster recovery and, it just, the town hall is one of the lowest lying buildings here and, we can't meet in this building. I would think that meeting via Zoom now that it's been so common that,
Right.
I just wonder if that was discussed and, I throw that out there as a suggestion, but I definitely would want to hear the board's rationale for changing it from should to shall.
Rick, it's all yours.
Well, let me say, this was not one of the stronger recommendations from the board.
Didn't light you on fire.
However, some of us who argued for this change, the reason was not for this commission. This, again, some of the purpose of the charter document is to prevent bad behavior. So the shall was put in just in case, and again, we're not talking about you guys. You get a commission who just decides, you know what, we're doing some moderately unpopular stuff. We're not really interested in withstanding the wrath of the public. Why don't we take a few months off from these meetings? You can look at that as extremely far-fetched and say, you know what, the summer, not vacation idea, but the summer off, or, we don't really need a meeting. You may weigh that more heavily. And, that's why I don't think our group was, fully behind this. But that's the reason for it. It's really to protect the public from potentially bad behavior on the part of the commission. While in a sense, maybe, ignoring some of the potential flexibility that would be nice for the commission.
Rick, has that ever happened?
Not to my knowledge, but I can foresee situations where it could.
Well, yeah, I agree that potential, but it seems to me if it's never happened, I think the potential probably is relatively small.
And in a town that had lots of issues where it should have happened and it didn't.
Right.
Marshall, is there a recourse that the electorate has if there's a commission like that?
Sure, you could recall, the voters can recall elected officials. It's kind of a cumbersome process, but that option always exists for the electorate. At any point in time, they could push for a recall election and remove one or all commissioners at the next regularly scheduled commission meeting, so long as they followed that state protocol. It's a little bit of heavy lift. You got to circulate a petition that's approved by supervisor of election. And I think you then have to get like 10% of the last voting group. So, I mean, it's possible. It's maybe a little bit easier here, but still you got to do a lot of work.
Then you have to do it again. It's got to be 2 petitions that go around. So it's
Yeah.
complicated. Glenn, is there a state statute that speaks to this?
And there is a law that requires that the town commission must meet in the town. So you can't meet in Boca Raton or Delray Beach, you must meet in the town. There's no requirement that it's at City Hall. I noticed that language says designated as town hall. Theoretically, in an emergency, you could designate any place as town hall. And you can say, based on this emergency, we're now designating XYZ condo as town hall until the emergency passes. So there is a way in an emergency situation, as you mentioned, we are low lying here, unfortunately, that it could be addressed.
Let's take an example of a runaway commission, as we were saying here. How does the electorate corral a runaway commission? They're spending money foolishly. They're not holding meetings except on a periodic basis. They're limiting the amount of time that residents can speak. They get it down to 2 minutes, blah, 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 blah. What can be done to get that under control?
Marshall gave you the prime example, which is your recall petitions to recall elected officials. Obviously, you wait till the next election and you unelect folks or you elect new people. You come and you protest here. You have a place filled with speakers. But that's a situation anytime someone's elected. And if you don't like the job they're doing, your remedy is always the ballot box. If it becomes to the point where it's criminal or unethical, then you always ask the governor to step in, the inspector general to step in. So there are different avenues to ask folks to step forward, but the only real authority is either the ballot box or the governor, Because even the inspector general can't remove you from office. He can do a report.
I think on a practical operational side of things, most likely if the commission's that bad, I probably would have been fired, but you would have certain business items have to be addressed. You can't not pay the bills, do certain things, issue contracts. I think you could probably do it for a short period of time, but I think out of a practical nature, you're going to run into a situation where no matter who the commission is, they have to meet to conduct business of the town. And the state doesn't allow Zoom as official meetings. You have to have a physical quorum. So, and again, I think you just have to do business. I mean, could you get away a month or two? Sure, probably could on a relatively simple basis. But after that, business of the town starts to fall apart and you can't issue checks. You can't do certain activities. You don't have contracts. You don't have vendors. You'll find yourself in a bad situation pretty quickly. But again, I can't say that would prevent a 2 or 3 or 4 month type of hiatus, but eventually you have to. And then the budgetary requirements that start coming into a play in the summer for your budget, you're required by law. As soon as you miss any of those statutory requirements, the governor can step in and sweep you all out and put in whoever he wants.
And the
or she
governors have
wants.
stepped in. I mean, the governor stepping in is not unusual. It does happen.
Mhm.
And there's always a court system. And if someone really feels that strongly, they go to court and they seek an injunction. But the governor is the most common route. I mean, Palm Beach County and South Bay 4 or 5 years ago, there were 3 commissioners accused of a sunshine law violation. They appointed 3 new people to step in until that issue was resolved. So
So the county can get involved then.
well, it's really the governor that gets involved, but the county will get involved. The court system could get involved depending on how bad things get. You'll be surprised how many people step in. The state attorney, if there's criminal activities, they step involved. So, but the governor has the overall authority to remove individuals. I think they removed the supervisor of election in Broward County a few years ago.
Right.
So
Right.
the governor does have that ability if things get that out of control.
But
Okay.
you've made reference to criminal activity. That seems to be fairly easy. All hell will break loose in that case. But I think you're referring to inaction, simply, not doing what they should be doing and doing nothing.
Dereliction of duty is
That would
often-
fall under
Right, would often
derelict.
be the category that's kind of the catch-all category that governors have historically used because they can't wait for the criminal justice system to.
Okay. I think we heard enough, right? Thank you.
Now that we've scared everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the original question. Has anybody changed their mind or no?
No, I think it should be shall, not should.
Okay, John, you still on shall?
Yep.
I'm fine with it.
Fine with shall or
Should.
should?
Should, yes, I'm
Should.
fine with should.
You're on should?
Should.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted clarification. I was,
Sorry.
Okay, and you're on.
Yeah,
should or
I'm
shall?
good with should. I mean, it sounds like the board didn't feel like they were that strongly, normally I would defer to the board, whatever their recommendation is, but it sounds like it wasn't a super strong recommendation and sounds like they would be okay with should. And, with respect to the building, sounds like there is a state law that you have to physically be present. So I guess we couldn't change that. And thanks to the town attorney to clarify, it's wherever we designate as town hall. So if this building, weren't available, we could designate some other building. So I'm good.
Okay, we're staying with it. No change. Let's move on to this one, which is about open lands. Peggy, I'm guessing this one was yours.
How did you know?
I'm just going to turn it over to you, Peg.
Well,
You might want to elaborate on it a little bit so we can all get a
Yes, sir.
sense for where you are.
we have a lot of open lands. If you look at a Google map or not driving by, but we do. And I think 2 years ago, Mr. Labadie and I were talking and I met with some people I knew and they helped me identify the ownership of those lands. It might have been last year. And most are all owned by the county. And that refers back to 1948, when all of our town was owned by the county until 17 families from New York came and established our town in 49. But the lands that were not purchased or deeded remain in county jurisdiction. And we don't know what the county has planned for that. I'm not talking this year or next year, but 50 years, 20 years. I thought it wise that we take a look at it and see if we shouldn't address these lands. Most of them are native original swampland, briny waters, brackish waters, a mix of sea and fresh. Most of it is original forestation and small scrub and all. A lot of wildlife lives in those areas. I know because some of it ends up on my back porch some days from a near scrubland. So I thought it wise to take a look at it and see if we can't address that fact that the county owns all of these parcels and see what they would like to do. Maybe it's not a charter item, but I wanted it to be looked at and discussed by our charter board and us at one point.
I would suspect, and I'm going to turn this over to Marshall,
Yes, sir.
that if in fact we can do anything to protect it, it would be in an ordinance rather than charter. But Marshall would know a lot more than I, so.
I have another question too, Marshall. Wouldn't they be subject to the same rules and regulations as anybody else who has land that has marshes and
Yeah,
whatever
one would
in it?
think, particularly all the
So,
state regulations.
Yeah,
and
I
whatnot.
would think it's controlled by state regulations regardless of who owns it.
Certainly makes sense.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Oh,
Everybody's
okay,
correct.
great.
Everybody wins. No, yeah, you would, I think, and I would assume that the Charter Review Board would agree that they found that the ordinance provision or structures or ability would be a better avenue to control the filling of lands, like we already have Chapter 14 that regulates that. The county, that we're all going to be subject to what the Army Corps is going to dictate or control, or the DEP. Similar to our last meeting when I said we have a conservation easement on the back of this property, we can't cut and fill and do all the things that the charter says you shall do. So I think this provision, again, this is probably one of those historic provisions when this place was settled. Probably was real swampy and full of bugs and not doing
Oh,
well
for
because it
sure.
was undeveloped. If anything, maybe this is an outdated provision because there's so many other laws and conditions in play. So.
Your point, though, might really come into play when developers do trades, where they trade. I think you're shaking your head too.
Yeah.
And it may be really worthwhile looking at this from an ordinance standpoint to prevent those trades.
Yes, sir, that's a fine idea. And if I could throw in the 2 lakes that are within town limits have not been surveyed and established also. I think they're the only 2 lakes except for one in North Palm Beach, which are in Palm Beach County along the coast. So it's just
Well,
like
how does that apply to this? Help me, I'm not
Yes, sir.
bridging that.
another point of ownership contention, that's all. This can be a separate discussion with the lakes, but the point is that past governance in our town did not establish these lands and waterways very specifically in an ordinance or a charter. But for this land use,
see what
it
you're
could be an ordinance. It's just not been looked at and seized and identified and set into writing. And I
Okay.
think that we can do this over time as a priority. It could be ordinance, might be, agreed with Commissioner David, that might be a great place for it.
Okay,
So there are 2 main issues here, I think. Obviously Milani Park, and then what will be.
No, Milani Park
Malani
doesn't
Park has
fall into
nothing to
this.
do with this.
No, I mean, it's still,
Low.
it's property that we might want to consider. Again, how that's used and how we would follow up and what's going to happen to it.
So I'm not following how you think that has relevance on this discussion.
Because it also adjoins, first of all, it's undeveloped. Second of all, it's owned by the county. Third of all, it is right next to additional mangrove. And I'm wondering if that's still an unresolved, undeveloped piece of property.
No,
What
that's
mangrove?
If.
It's
no,
not next to any
There's a little bit of
mangrove.
a
it's
wetland.
next to a little bit of a swampy area,
Yeah, it's low. So
And it's a small
but
area.
that's-
of-
and it's zoned for development where
I know.
Milani is.
So the question would be, resolving what's going to happen to that. I think we're on a track that should be done. But the other issue is the so-called Gold City, the mangroves south of Tuscany.
Yeah.
I mean, any other mangroves are fairly small. I mean, where you couldn't put much on it. But in Gold City, that could be a huge
Okay,
development.
well, here's what happens, and for people that are watching. A developer comes in, they own a little bit piece of property that is developable, and it's next to mangroves. They want to use the mangrove area. And obviously, we say, well, there's no way you can use the mangrove area. So, well, I'm going to trade, okay, for some mangrove area that I own in even another county, someplace else. So I'm going to give you, not us, I'm going to give the county or the state this mangrove area, and I'm going to take this mangrove area, and then I'm going to fill it all in. And now I have a bigger place to build on. That's the trade that we were just talking about. And that's done every day. And we in a town have nothing to say about it.
Right.
So Peggy's idea, if we marry that to this trade that we were just talking about, trading, might be something we could look into. Not sure that it would work, but worth looking into
I
it.
think we're a little late on that. aren't we?
Well, I think with the Milani Park property, how this charter provision would apply is it would give us the authority to go to the county, let's say, since they own the property, and say, it holds water, it's creating some problems, you got to fill it in. It gives us the authority to compel them and make them fill in
That's-
the low areas to keep out the swamp.
That's already in the charter, already exists in the charter.
This is what we're talking about, fills.
No, but it's
Here.
already there.
It is, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, like, how does Milani Park play into it? Well, this would apply to Milani Park to say those areas that are holding water, we could compel them to fill it in now.
Yeah, but I think Peggy was saying
Correct, we're
We
talking
want
to the
to
environmental
not
components.
let them fill it in. That to leave it the way it is, not in those situations where we want them to fill it in.
In non-mangrove adjacent properties?
Right. We just haven't enforced it, but it's been there all the time.
Yes, sir. And if I could add that the swampland does act as a filter, and it's an important environmental
Absolutely.
protection area, and that my opinion would be to leave as many remaining natural at this point where we are in our town and not advance future development. How many more cars can anyone handle? And the filtration efforts of those mangroves and scrublands are a great avenue. The problem with brackish standing water is that there's not enough flow in and out from the intercoastal to keep the water moving and not have it grow algae and bacteria and
just
so forth.
attracts-
That's all. But it
attracts
needed a
bugs
hard
and
look, I
everything
thought.
else.
It's
Yeah, nobody
important.
wants
We
it.
have a lot of land out there that's just sitting.
Okay. So there's really nothing for us to do on this except for investigate and see if we can move it into a little different direction.
That would be
to
fine.
protect it.
Yes, sir.
Agreed.
Okay, let's move on to the next. Fire rescue protection. This subject, and the committee picked up on it right away, is really to prevent the sell-off, if you will, and management of some of our really major resources here in town. And it could be where we decide to not manage our own police department and bring in the county sheriff's department. So we disband our police department, turn it over to the county sheriff, and now we have no control over police in our town. And we do that because we can save $500,000 a year. Well, we believe in self-rule here, and we believe that we can manage it ourselves better and probably save money in doing it, but money isn't the driving factor. The driving factor is self-rule and having better services for our population here in town. Building this into the charter prevents the acquisition of some of our, call it major resources or major assets in the town. And they're defined here as the water plant, the future fire department, and the police department. So now open for discussion. John, we'll start with you.
Well, obviously, we're in a predicament now that we're trying to resolve this whole thing with fire EMS. So I I think this is a good thing. It's what we're doing now anyway, in terms of fire, but now that it would be our own. We don't want to see another commission turn around and say, oh, let's get rid of this and go to a county fire department as another example. Police is a third one. Water, oh my goodness, you could sell that for a good penny. But having that independence is important. So, for self-rule, for independence, self-reliance as a town and for the safety and welfare. And none of these cases do I think we should do anything until, or unless we ask for a referendum and the community's support. So I'm in favor of making this kind of a stipulation.
Okay,
Yeah, I think this is a prudent change. It makes absolute perfect sense, and I would agree to that.
Beck,
Totally agree with my fellow commissioners, and the Charter Review Board did a great job, and I'm all for it.
good.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify, it doesn't completely prevent it, right? It says it puts it out to vote. So it prevents it that the commission making the decision
Right.
alone. If some unforeseeable situation happens in the future, and for some reason it becomes clear that it should be switched over, the community does have the option to vote in a change.
Absolutely.
So I just want to clarify that. It just doesn't absolutely say, prevent it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it goes to referendum.
Right. The community votes, it's not just up to the 5.
And that's why it's saying approved by referendum.
Yep.
Yep.
And I guess one question I have, the contract that we created, I think it's for EMS medical services with the doctor who currently works with Boca. How does this language affect our ability to contract with it? It doesn't,
No.
because why doesn't it? Like, I guess when I read this, it gave me cause for concern. Like, are we being too restrictive and wouldn't be able to? No.
No, I would take a look at this as more of a managerial control. So long as you have the ability to say, Dr. Cohen, hey, this has been great. We're going to go in a different direction. Nothing prevents you from changing medical directors. What you couldn't do is you couldn't, as a commission, say, Boca, you get to do all of our fire and EMS, and you get to take that control. Nope, can't be done. But you could I don't want to use the word outsource. We had to really be cave and moderate our language on that. You could use a consultant to provide this service so long as you retain the managerial and decision-making authority of that operation. So conceivably, you could go to a vendor that says, we can provide you firefighters. It's still our fire department. We make every financial decision. It's just that they're going to supply us with the bodies, but it's ours. So it's ours to control. Basically, what you don't have now is you have full control at the table of what happens, how we move forward, and what decisions are made.
We couldn't contract with Boca for police and give them control and enter into a contract like we have with Delray Fire now, unless we go to a referendum.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that overall philosophy. When I read it, my only concern was as if we were being too restrictive and tying our hands with doing contract. Okay.
No, again, the wording says abolish, merge, sell, or otherwise transfer managerial control. That's everything. It's the whole ball of wax. It's gone. You can't do that unless we go to a referendum.
So it couldn't be translated to mean any specific,
And I would say that it
subset of-
wouldn't come into play with mutual aid agreements because you have the
Okay.
control to remove yourself from a mutual aid and enter into a mutual aid. You still have the decision-making authority to enter and remove yourself in those type of arrangements. You haven't just given everything over and said, just provide us a service. We just write a check. So.
Okay.
Okay. Question for Glenn. The wording that goes into our charter, which is the wording that is here, is that the same wording that has to go on the referendum? He's smiling. You know where I'm going on this.
It's funny you ask it because as you're doing these, I'm writing both the ballot language and the ordinance so that while it's all fresh and it is a little different. So
Oh,
for
okay.
example, the ballot language, you're limited to 75 words.
Right.
And 15 words in the title. The ordinance is the full ordinance that would include all the language. So your ordinance language that you're seeing here, that will be the actual charter ordinance language that's in the charter. Your ballot language will be a little different. So for example, the draft starts with the title, maintaining town self-rule over essential functions of fire, rescue, police, or water without referendum. So that's a title. You're all going to see this title, and this is a quick first draft, obviously. And then the body of it will be a little bit more, shall the town of Highland Beach amend its charter at section such and such to provide, and then it's a few more words.
Okay.
So
Yeah, be more,
I'm trying to multitask and simultaneously
Yeah,
get a
no,
good
good.
draft. So
yeah, no,
when I
I'm
get back to
concerned
the
about it
office-
being more easily understood by our population.
yes,
We're in
you
the
have to-
same way.
You
though.
have to put it in plain English.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm good with it. Well done, Dean. Okay, let's move on. This is on drainage. Strengthen the language to include enforcement. The consensus was not to take any action on this because they thought it would fall into an ordinance or a resolution. Yeah, I think enforcement does not belong in a charter unless anybody disagrees.
Not at all.
But there may be things in ordinance or resolutions that do strengthen enforcement if need be. So whoever brought this one to their attention should bring it up for that. Okay. Anybody disagree? Okay. Move on. Funding limits we're going to hold up on.
With that, though, before you turn the page, you've given me a series of things you would like to see as part of that discussion at our next special meeting.
Right.
Correct?
Yep.
Okay. And if it's other things that come to you by that time, like, hey, I'd like to know this or that, please just let us know.
Yeah, I mean, basically in summary, I'd like to get an understanding of the environment at the time that 350 was set.
Okay.
So we understand the validity of that 350.
I would also like to define some of the terms that are used so that
What do you
they're
mean
clearer.
terms?
Well, what constitutes a single project? And what if things are scheduled over a number of years? Is that one project or two or three projects?
Very good.
So, I mean,
So we don't have that kind of conversation in the future.
yeah, because it's not clear what applies and what doesn't apply right now.
And also, if I could add, Mayor, a lease, if a lease falls into what category? Because the new fire truck was set forth into a lease 6 or 8 years ago, and it had failed in referendum.
Okay, I'd like to give you my opinion on that. I mean, I'm not a
Yes, sir,
lawyer, so
that's
it's not
fine.
a legal opinion.
Just throwing it out as
But,
another option
No,
to define.
I'm glad you brought it up. I think, just personally, for full transparency to our population, that a long-term lease is a financial commitment. So if, let's say, for example, we were going to sign a lease today, we've got a 350 maximum that we can commit to. If that was a 10-year lease at $50,000 a year, that's $500,000. I don't believe we should make that commitment because we're committing $500,000 to one activity, even though it's only 50 grand a year. Now, legally, maybe under our terms, we can do that. Okay, so I just see it as that's a $500,000 commitment. Now, I don't know what the legal explanation is, and I'm not going to ask right now because we're not doing it. Okay, but I think when we do set it for futures, I totally agree with you. We need to know what the definitions are.
And Mayor, then also, if you are in a bind and we lost a fire truck or whatever, and we need to get a fire truck and we lease one for 1 year at $50,000, using your number, that would be perfectly fine.
Yes. Here's the problem that I don't want us to run into. And we will run into it unless we have the appropriate numbers established. Under this scenario we just set up, 50 grand, 10 years, 500 grand, we only have 350 to spend. We need the fire truck, so we're going to have to do a short-term lease. Well, that short-term lease will be $75,000, not $50,000.
Right.
We just wasted $25,000 of taxpayer money because we were stuck with only $350,000. Well, that's bad business. We're wasting money. So we have to, when the time comes, we have to set appropriate numbers here, and we have to have appropriate definitions. Because we don't want to be wasting money.
Totally agree.
Okay. Enough of that. That's why it's going to be a lengthy discussion. Okay. All right. Where did we leave off here? Payment of debts. Thank you. Okay. This is allowing the town manager and the finance director to sign off. That's really what it comes down to, as opposed to pulling in directors or, excuse me, commissioners all the time. And I must tell you, last week I signed 156 checks in one sitting. Okay. There's getting into closing, end of the month, et cetera. But anyways, the recommendation is to move forward on that request. Maybe we'll start at the other end. Peggy, what you're thinking on this?
I'm fine with it as it's written. My only question for my fellow commissioners would be, as Dr. Greenwald had said, looking at a worst case scenario with a runaway, say, management team
Mhm.
or an poorly managed town,
Yep.
which of course, Mr. Labadie would not fall in that category, but it has happened here in the past and in other towns. So what would prevent that from occurring? I don't know.
Well, got to remember they're bonded, so it's covered. But yes, it could happen. It could become a significant hassle getting all the money back, but it could happen.
Mr. Labadie has his hand up.
Yeah, so just quickly to let everybody know, just it's always good to, how things are done are pretty safe now with dual authentications. We do now formally have a custodial relationship over our investments. So one individual can't make a off the cuff investment choice or move your money somewhere because there's somebody watching the two people inside that have to agree to make an investment choice. So let's go with our reserves, our cash, right? Our unassigned fund balance. Two people could say, oh, we're going to go do this. They won't catch us. Well, now you have a third party custodian that's going to say, it's not even consistent with your investment policy. No, you can't do it. And they'll check, where is it going? When is it going to go there? Who is this? So we have a lot of protections and layers. Myself removed at any point in time, you will have those protections remaining in place with the way the financial management's done here. It can't be unilaterally done. It requires a lot of sign-offs. It's dual authentications. When you log in to do some basic banking requires, multiple approvals. You have a lot of protections that potentially 20 years ago never existed in finance in the public sector, especially at a local government.
Okay, you want to walk us through the day-to-day activities, monthly checks, paying bills?
Yeah, so
et cetera?
we have about $1 million, $1.2 million is our burn rate every month, is basically with payroll. Here are big things: payroll, Delray Fire. That's where all your money goes, right? So I mean, that's pretty much what you're spending your dollars on. And between those two things, that's 80% of your monthly expenditures. After that, it's chemicals for the water plant. It's random paper, electricity, cable, telephones, power. Those type of things are really where all your money goes to. And we do payroll bi-weekly. That goes through, gets done, gets confirmed. Dual authentication on that as well. One, to make sure it's consistent with the contracts for the union employees and not. And then once it gets done, it goes into the APPO system, which is within BSNA, which is a new dual authentication process to even get authorization. So a department can't even spend it with one validating against the approved budget of this commission, allowing the money to go, along with two people in the finance department. So there's this audit trail on everything we do. So any approval at any point in time, we could walk it back. Who said yes at any point in time? And then our purchasing policy is fit into our financial system that says who can do what at what levels. In-house, we can only go to 25,000. After that, it requires the commission's approval on anything therefore. And then when you do the check runs, it goes through, then you have to have that approved, runs out, sign the 2 checks. Any transfers of money between the operating and reserve accounts to fund it has to be dual authenticated. So I mean, there's lots of steps, a lot of layers to get anything approved. So one person can't go rogue on you. It would take, I don't know how that would work. So thank God I don't know, but it would take multiple layers and people and institutions to do something wrong. So,
Yet it still happens.
those stories go away. I always think that when I did, today I had to move money into the custodial account. It's like an act of Congress to move the money that we have control over, how many different people I had to talk to, how many other authentications and certain signing authorities. I don't know how those things happen at the local level anymore, outside of if you watched all the Queen's Horsemen or whatever. It's kind of a collusion activity. You need other people on the outside to balance against it at so many levels that it's near impossible.
Okay, Tasha.
It looks like it was unanimous from the board to move forward with this change, and sounds like from Mr. Labadie that there's a lot of checks and balances involved. So yeah, I'm in favor of the change.
John.
Well, I am assuming when the finance director is not available, not in position, whatever, that the next person in finance in the finance group.
No.
Well, wait a minute, hold on.
Okay. No.
Would at least be involved to, learn the process.
Sure.
Sign off on it, join both you and the commissioner, so that there's 3 people involved even, so that we can have the assistant finance director learn more directly and feel somewhat responsible for what is being signed for. Is that not a reasonable?
To a
process?
certain extent, I can't have one person doing everything. You have to
Oh,
have
no,
separation of
absolutely.
duties and powers within a
Absolutely.
balanced finance department. And we have that. And we have people learning those parts that can fill in to do some of the mechanical side of making it happen within the system. Only 7 people, 5, myself, and the finance, only ones that can sign checks. That's it. Only one to pay bills.
But the
So-
assistant finance director, I'll call him and refer that, would present the bills to you and say, these checks should be signed.
Yes, they could process it through the system. So Susie, our accountant, does a lot of the AP and PO prep and journal entries. Eric, our financial services manager, goes in and makes sure it works against the PO and it's budgeted. And then it does fall back to the finance director to approve that.
So then it goes and we get a commissioner or the mayor to sign.
Mhm.
How often then do we audit those actions? Is it- is
But
it-
you do bank reconciliations every month. Well, basically then says, what was that check cash? Do we
Okay,
check
so
back
it's
to the
monthly.
right vendor? Is it put into the right fund in the right budget account within each department? So we do that every month. All that, fund accounting and bringing it back, reconciliations, journal entries and accruing it back appropriately to the certain departments. Yeah.
Okay. Well, given our current situation where we're asking the mayor to sign up on, how long will we have to go before we have a finance director, do you think?
It'll be a little while. We'll be good. All those things, all those protocols are in place. All the protections that you have are in place. All the right steps to protect us are in place.
That means you get another raise. I'm good.
I'm good with it, except I would like to add something, just that if neither the town manager and the financial director are not available, that 2 commissioners can sign. It's an unlikely occurrence, but it's potentially possible.
I think that's a good idea. And what happens if one, I think that's a good idea. Two
Well,
would be
because
great.
then you've got
Yes,
5
ma'am.
more people.
Things have happened in this town in the last, since I've lived here, so
You
we
know.
might as well just have as many stopgaps as we can.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
just never know.
Yes, ma'am.
It doesn't cost us anything to add that, and it's just a level of protection. As far as not having people go rogue, you can't protect against everything. And you just have to accept some things as acceptable risks.
Anything else?
Nope.
The only thing we might want to consider, and I just throw it out for us to think about, do we want to put a maximum on this? Do we, meaning, for example, the Del Rey check is almost $500,000. $450,000 every month. There are a couple other big ones, but that's by far, nothing else is close to that. Do you want a commissioner to have to sign that check?
I don't want to put that in the charter.
No, you can
Big-
put, what you can do is put a max, say, this applies to everything up to $250,000
But
or whatever.
Based on what has happened in the past, you put numbers like that in the charter, you then 20 years down the road are stuck with a number that you put in that is no longer truly applicable.
Well, you can also put a number in and say to be reviewed in 5 years. To be reviewed on such and such a date.
Could we do that by ordinance instead of putting that in the charter itself?
That's
Because
good.
that's
That's a good,
more-
that's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, that's more function than it is
Yeah.
policy.
That's a great idea. It forces whoever's here to look at that at whatever time we want it to be looked at. If
Yeah.
we want to put a maximum on it.
If I want to put a max, I'd rather do it by ordinance than putting it in the charter.
But so the question becomes, can an ordinance make a charter change? Oh, no. You're saying do an ordinance that says.
Sets a maximum,
Right.
but that says that this
Gotcha.
ordinance, or the maximum in this ordinance
Yeah.
shall be reviewed every 5 years.
I like that idea. Everybody else comfortable with that? That's a great idea.
Yes, great.
And I guess if we're going to do something like that, I would tie it to like some percentage of the budget or something like that, so that you don't run into an obsolete number. You can still do review
Yeah.
every 5
As
years.
an
but
ordinance, I like that a lot. Yep.
1% or I don't know, 2% of the
Yeah.
budget.
I agree, because I think when we set absolute
Right.
numbers,
It
we
quickly-
wind up running into
Yeah.
problems.
Okay, so what we're saying is, yes, we want to put a lid on it. And we'll just determine how to express that lid through an ordinance.
Right.
Exactly.
Good.
Great.
Did you want to say something, Rick? So we would then approve this.
Yeah.
So in the charter, you want to say that a cap shall be established annually or every 5 years by minimum by the commission? No, we're not, we're shaking our head over there.
No,
Right. So you just want an
Right.
ordinance that says it. Okay, got it.
yeah.
Okay,
Keep it
Yes.
separate.
That's exactly what is being said here.
okay.
Yeah, for whatever it's worth, the group went through this discussion and we discussed placing limits at various numbers. And we all decided that it would be much cleaner if we went this way. And in all honesty, we did not consider well, suppose both the town manager and the finance director aren't present. So we didn't consider that
Yep.
possibility.
Thanks. Okay, I think we're good then.
So the next time we meet, we'll give you revised language on that.
Yeah.
The two commissioners in the absence of the finance and town manager.
Yep. Oh, this is going to be an interesting one. This is salaries of commissioners and mayor. Board recommended the existing language in the ordinance in the ordinance be used for the referendum to be unchanged. And I'll just read it so people that's watching It says salaries of commissioners and mayor, the members of the town commission who are appointed and or elected under the provision of this act shall receive such salaries as the commission may determine by ordinance from time to time. Anybody want to comment? You gonna start? Yep.
Yeah, no, I think that language is fine because then the second part is talking about when that pay goes into effect. So it's actually a two-part question.
Want to expand on that so people that are watching know what we're talking about?
Yeah, one is saying, okay, you can change your salaries by ordinance. And then the second part is really more a functional, procedural, which is if the commission changes the salaries from 750 to 1,000, that 1,000 doesn't go into effect until the person who voted on it is either reelected or no longer in office. That you're not putting through a raise for yourself during the current term.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds, because we just, said, yeah, take what was in the ordinance and do that we didn't really talk about. We actually spent a lot of time on this one. It was very involved and we did in fact end up saying that. But just after a lot of discussions and what ifs, just as the commissioner just pointed out, I guess where our intent ended up was, it goes back to the old thing again of, if it's abused, throw the rascals out. And so we decided again, leave it clean, leave it simple for the framework of the charter, and then deal with it, let the citizens deal with it through the balance of power. So yes, we did look at all kinds of different things. One of the concerns we had about making it not effective for a sitting person is you get into this inequity kind of thing. Some people being paid more than another person doing the same work. So we decided just to not even go there.
Yeah, there's also the accounting issue where it becomes an accounting nightmare to
Yes.
try and figure out who's getting what, as opposed to, exactly what everybody's getting.
Yes, so
Well, excuse me, but then an effect will occur. For example, you're up for potential reelection.
Right.
In March. So if we voted for the 20% increase that was discussed, you would come in then in March, assuming you won, which you will, you would come in and get a 20% increase over what you're getting now. You would then be paid more than your other two commissioners.
Yeah, and even though I just spoke about that, to be honest, I don't think that I would necessarily need that to go into effect.
Well, but that, you don't have a choice. You would, under this, you would be paid 20% more than the other two commissioners that you are serving with.
Yes, and
Is that what we want?
I think we need to discuss it. I don't know that that's what we want. That's one of the things that was recommended, but I don't know that we necessarily want to go there. I think that they're right, that the language itself in the charter should be clean. And again, some of these things should be dealt with by ordinance as opposed to in the charter.
Gotcha.
I mean, much like our Constitution is really a very short document,
Okay.
but the statutes are voluminous.
I'm with you. And it's got to be short and simple. I watched virtually all of the meetings and you guys wrestled with this one a lot. And it seemed to me as though you had a real concern about the members of the commission giving themselves raises. It just didn't look good. That simple. but that's kind of the way it is. And this was kind of a happy medium if the commission decided, yeah, they'd give themselves raises, but they're really giving the position a raise when either a new person came into that slot or they took over that slot again when they were reelected. So that was kind of like a way to get around people giving themselves raises. That's kind of what I read in it. And I get it. It becomes difficult then because you then have the situation we just described. You have one commissioner earning one amount, and other commissioners earning another amount. I don't think that's fair. Let me finish. I think that I don't have a problem with a commissioner giving themselves a raise. If they think they deserve a raise, we're not talking a lot of money to begin with. It's almost volunteer work. And I think you're dealing with principle here more than anything else. If the commissioners think they should get raises, I think they have the right to give themselves a raise. It should be immediate, should be on the next payroll. I think that takes care of it, nice and simple. People are unhappy with it, then don't vote for them the next time around or something. I mean, I think you look at the person's worth. I think you look at what the accomplishments are and what they're doing, and the kind of money that we're talking about is kind of peanuts when you're dealing with the kind of work that's being done, the budgets that are being dealt with, and the accomplishments that are being done. That's just my opinion. John?
So, well, you all know that I don't feel that it is appropriate for the kind of salaries that the commission makes now. $1,000 a month for a commissioner. A 20% raise would be $200. So you're right. We're not talking about big money here. But I do think that there are some people who feel that it shouldn't be up to us to decide that we can give ourselves a raise, that it really should be approved by the residents first, and then we can raise our salaries. The other option is avoid this, alternating increases for various members of the commission over time. I think, honestly, and maybe this is just my business sense, you can vote as a commission to raise the salaries by a percentage, which may have a maximum that we could do in any 1 year that would, prevent some residents feeling that, oh, we could double our salaries and we could be, corrupt and walk away with all the money and get around stealing it behind the scenes. We're stealing it up front, by voting. I'm going to get 100% salary increase. So we could do a maximum, but I do think